In the early 1970s, a group of scientists and researchers in Toronto set out to answer a dangerous question. Not whether ghosts exist, but whether the human mind could create one. This group was not made up of occultists or spiritualists. They were members of the Toronto Society for Psychical Research, including engineers, psychologists, accountants, and sociologists. Most were skeptics. Some were openly hostile to paranormal explanations. Their idea was simple but unsettling. If poltergeist activity is caused by unconscious human psychokinesis, then it should be possible to deliberately create a haunting. So they invented a ghost. They gave him a name, Philip Aylesford. They constructed a detailed biography. Philip was said to be a 17th century English nobleman who fell in love with a gypsy woman, was condemned by his family, and ultimately died by suicide. None of this was true. Philip never existed. The group agreed on one crucial rule. No one was to pretend anything paranormal was happening. No tricks, no deception. No role-playing. They met regularly around a table, not to summon spirits, but to focus collectively on Philip's story. At first, nothing happened. Weeks passed. Then months. The sessions were boring, uneventful, and frustrating. Then something changed. The group reported faint knocking sounds. At first, these were dismissed as normal building noise, but the knocks became more frequent and began responding to questions. 1 knock for yes, 2 knocks for no. The responses were consistent. When asked questions Philip should know based on his fictional biography, the knocks responded correctly. When asked factual historical questions outside the invented story, there was no response. Soon after, the table began to vibrate. Witnesses described it rocking gently at first, then more violently. Eventually, the table reportedly lifted 1 leg off the ground. Lights flickered. Objects moved slightly across the surface. These effects were observed by multiple participants simultaneously. Importantly, no one entered a trance. No medium was used. No one claimed to be possessed. The group attempted to debunk themselves. They changed seating arrangements. They altered lighting. They introduced observers who did not know Philip's story. The phenomena weakened when skeptical observers were present and strengthened when the original group returned. This pattern disturbed the researchers. If the effects were fraudulent, they would require coordinated deception among people with no incentive to fake anything. If psychological, they should not produce external physical movement observed by everyone at once. The group published their findings cautiously. They did not claim they had proven the existence of spirits. Instead, they proposed something more unsettling. That collective belief, expectation, and imagination might be capable of producing measurable physical effects. Skeptics immediately countered with the ideomotor effect, the same unconscious muscle movements responsible for Ouija boards and dowsing rods. According to this explanation, participants unknowingly caused the table movements themselves. But this explanation did not satisfy everyone. Observers noted that some table movements occurred when participants' hands were clearly visible or lightly touching. Knocking sounds sometimes came from beneath the table or from walls. More troubling was the consistency of the responses. Philip answered questions with personality, emotion, and narrative continuity, despite being entirely fictional. Encouraged by the results, similar experiments were conducted in other countries. In Australia, a group created a fictional entity named Skippy. In Germany, another group attempted the same procedure. In several cases, reported phenomena emerged again. Not always, not consistently, but often enough to raise serious questions. Critics argue that expectation and group dynamics are powerful forces. Humans are social animals. When people share belief, they unconsciously reinforce one another. Supporters argue that belief alone should not move furniture. What makes the Philip experiment unique among paranormal cases is transparency. There was no ancient legend, no haunted location, no traumatic history. The ghost was invented deliberately. If the phenomena were real, then they did not originate from the dead, but from the living. This idea deeply unsettled both believers and skeptics. Perhaps psychologists suggested the experiment supported theories of thought forms, autonomous psychic constructs generated by collective mental energy. Psychologists suggested the experiment demonstrated the extraordinary power of group suggestion. Neither explanation has been conclusively proven. The experiments stopped, not because they failed, but because researchers grew uncomfortable with the implications. Creating entities, even fictional ones, raised ethical concerns. What if belief could externalize itself? What if hauntings were not echoes of the past, but byproducts of the present? Decades later, the Philip experiment remains one of the most controversial studies in paranormal research. It is rarely discussed in mainstream science. It is cautiously referenced in parapsychology, and it is often misunderstood online. Yet it poses a question that refuses to go away. If a ghost can be created, does it matter whether it was ever human? And if the mind can manifest physical effects without intention, what else might it be capable of?